What happens when an actor hates the film that makes him immortal? December 1966. Rome, Italy. Clint Eastwood sits in a cramped editing room watching himself on screen. He's wearing a poncho, smoking a cigarillo, squinting into the desert sun. And he hates every second of it. Not because the film is bad, because it's working. And that terrifies him. The film is the good, the bad, and the ugly. It will become one of the greatest westerns ever made. But right now, in this moment, Clint is watching his career become something he never intended, something he can't control. And the director, Sergio Leone, is sitting 3 feet away, smiling. To understand why Clint hated this film, you need to understand who he was in 1966. He was 36 years old, a television actor, not a star, not yet. He'd spent 6 years playing Rowdy Yates on Rawhide, a decent Western series that paid the bills but didn't make anyone famous. He was tired, frustrated, wondering if this was all there was. Then Sergio Leone called, an Italian director nobody in Hollywood had heard of. He wanted Clint for a Western, a strange Western, one with almost no dialogue, where the hero didn't talk, didn't explain, just acted. The pay was $15,000. 3 films, shot in Spain. Clint's agent told him not to do it. These European Westerns are trash, the agent said. You'll ruin your career. But Clint took the job anyway. Not because he believed in Leone, because he needed the money, because he was desperate, because anything was better than another year on Rawhide playing second fiddle to Eric Fleming. So he flew to Spain, put on the poncho, and discovered that Sergio Leone was either a genius or completely insane. Leone didn't direct like American directors. He didn't care about plot. He didn't care about dialogue. He cared about faces, about silence, about the space between words. He would shoot a close-up of Clint's eyes for 30 minutes. Just the eyes. No movement, no dialogue, just Clint staring into nothing. What are you feeling, Clint? Nothing. Perfect. Show me nothing. Show me a man who has seen everything and feels nothing anymore. That's the character. The man with no name isn't empty because he's evil. He's empty because he's survived. And survival costs everything. Clint hated it. He hated standing in the Spanish heat for hours. Hated the terrible scripts that read more like poetry than screenplays. Hated that Leone barely spoke English and communicated through a translator who seemed to make things up half the time. But most of all, Clint hated that it was working. The first film, A Fistful of Dollars, came out in 1964. It was released in Italy first, then across Europe. It became a phenomenon, not in America. America didn't care yet. But in Europe, suddenly everyone knew the man with no name. The silent gunslinger who killed without remorse and walked away without looking back. Leone immediately wanted a sequel. For a few dollars more, Clint returned to Spain in 1965. Same poncho, same squint, same silence. And the film made even more money. Now Hollywood was paying attention. Now agents were calling. Now producers wanted to know about this spaghetti Western phenomenon. But Clint still wasn't sure. These films felt wrong to him. Too violent, too stylized, too European. American Westerns were about honor, about good men fighting bad men, about justice and morality and the triumph of right over wrong. Leone's Westerns were about money, about survival, about men who killed because killing was the only language they knew. There were no heroes, just degrees of evil. And the man with no name sat somewhere in the middle, not good, not bad, just efficient. In 1966, Leone approached Clint for a third film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This one would be bigger and epic. The budget was $500,000, enormous for a European Western. The shoot would last 6 months. And Leone had a vision. 3 men hunting for Confederate gold. A treasure hunt across a war-torn landscape where the Civil War is just background noise. Where battles happen and men die, and none of it matters because the only thing that matters is the gold. Clint read the script. He hated it. The character he was playing, Blondie, nicknamed the Good, wasn't good. He was a con man, a thief. He betrayed his partner repeatedly. He let men die to save himself. He was only good compared to the other two, Angel Eyes and Tuco, who were worse. That's the joke. In a world of monsters, the least monstrous man gets called good. Clint went to Leone. I don't understand this character. What's his motivation? Leone looked at him like the question was absurd. Money? That's his motivation. Money. He doesn't care about the war. Doesn't care about the Confederacy or the Union. He just wants the gold so he can disappear. But that's not heroic. It's not supposed to be heroic. It's supposed to be human. They shot in Spain again. Almeria, a desert region that looked exactly like the American Southwest. Leone built an entire town from scratch. He hired 1,500 Spanish extras to play Union and Confederate soldiers. He choreographed battle scenes that cost more than most entire Westerns. And through it all, Clint stood there in his poncho, smoking cigarillos, saying almost nothing. The production was chaos. Leone was a perfectionist. He would shoot 50 takes of a single scene. He would spend an entire day lighting one shot. He would make Clint stand in the sun for hours, waiting for the light to be exactly right. And Clint, who prided himself on efficiency, who believed that film was about economy, that you did 3 takes and moved on, was losing his mind. One day, they were shooting the final standoff, the famous 3-way duel in the cemetery. Blondie, Angel Eyes, and Tuco facing each other, each waiting for the others to draw. Leone had built the cemetery specifically for this scene. Hundreds of graves, a circular arena, and in the center, 3 men about to kill each other over gold they haven't even confirmed exists. The scene required precision. The camera had to move at exactly the right speed. The music, composed by Ennio Morricone, had to sync perfectly with the cuts. The actors had to hold their positions for minutes while Leone adjusted angles. Clint stood there. Eli Wallach, playing Tuco, stood there. Lee Van Cleef, playing Angel Eyes, stood there. And Leone kept adjusting. After the 30th take, Clint walked off set. Not angrily, just walked away. Sat in the shade of a prop building, lit a cigar. He didn't storm off, didn't yell, just removed himself. Leone followed. Through his translator, he asked, "What's wrong?" Clint looked at him. "I don't know what we're doing anymore, Sergio. We've shot this scene 30 times. It's a staring contest. That's all it is." 3 guys looking at each other. When does it become a film? Leone sat down next to him. "Clint, do you know why this scene works? Because it's not about the shooting. It's about the waiting. The audience knows someone is going to die. They just don't know who, and the longer we wait, the more they lean forward, the more they invest. By the time someone draws, they're so tense they can't breathe. That's cinema, not the violence, the anticipation of violence." "But there's no story," Clint said. "No arc. My character starts as a mercenary and ends as a mercenary. He doesn't change. He doesn't learn anything." "Exactly." Leone smiled. "Because most men don't change. They just survive. And surviving is enough. Your character isn't a hero. He's a survivor. And that's more honest than any Hollywood hero I've ever seen." They finished shooting. The film was released in Italy in December 1966. It was an instant phenomenon, lines around the block, critics calling it a masterpiece, audiences obsessed with the man with no name. And Clint, watching from Los Angeles, still hated it. Hated that this was what made him famous. Not his years on television, not his dedication to craft. A cartoon character in a poncho who barely spoke. American critics destroyed it. Judith Crist called it the burn, the gouge, and the mangle. The New York Times dismissed it as the most expensive, pious, and repellent movie in the history of its peculiar genre. Roger Ebert called it violent and empty. And Clint, reading these reviews, felt vindicated. "See," he told his wife, "I knew it was trash. American audiences won't accept this. It's too European, too strange." But then something unexpected happened. The film opened in American theaters in January 1968, and audiences loved it. Not critics, regular people. They lined up. They saw it multiple times. They quoted the few lines Blondie had. They bought the soundtrack. They made the theme song with its iconic whistle and guitar one of the most recognizable pieces of music in film history. Within 6 months, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly had made back 10 times its budget. It became the highest-grossing film in the trilogy. It made Clint Eastwood a legitimate movie star. Studios started calling. Directors wanted to work with him. And suddenly, at 38 years old, Clint had the career he'd always wanted. But it came from a film he didn't believe in, from a character he didn't understand, from a director whose vision felt alien to everything he'd been taught about cinema. Years passed. Clint became a director himself, made his own films: Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, Gran Torino, films about morality, about consequence, about the cost of violence. Everything Leone's westerns weren't. And people kept asking him about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Kept telling him it was his best work. Kept saying The Man with No Name was iconic. And Clint, who had spent his entire career trying to escape that character, couldn't understand why. In 2003, a journalist from Premiere magazine asked him directly, "Do you like the good, the bad, and the ugly?" Clint thought for a long time. Then he said something surprising. "No, I didn't like it then. I still don't like it now. But I respect it. I respect what Sergio did. He made me uncomfortable, made me question everything I thought I knew about westerns, about heroes, about cinema. And that discomfort, that friction, that's what made the film work," the journalist pressed. "But you played the character. You were Blondie. How can you hate a performance you gave?" "I don't hate the performance. I hate that people think that's who I am. The man with no name, the silent killer, the guy who rides into town, solves problems with violence, and rides out without consequence. That's not me. That's never been me, but it's who people see when they look at me." In 2007, Clint was invited to a retrospective screening of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at the Cannes Film Festival. The film had been restored. The colors were vibrant. The sound was crisp. It looked better than it ever had. Clint almost didn't go. He was 77 years old, still making films, still trying to prove he was more than a man in a poncho. But his producer convinced him. "You owe Sergio this. He made you a star." Clint sat in the theater, watched the film for the first time in 30 years. And something happened. He saw it differently, not as the actor who hated the experience, but as the director who understood craft. He saw what Leone had done, the composition, the pacing, the way silence built tension more effectively than dialogue ever could, the way violence, when used sparingly, became operatic, the way Morricone's music elevated every frame. And he saw his own face, younger, harder, the squint that became his trademark, the stillness that made him different from every other actor, the way he could communicate entire paragraphs with a single look. He'd hated that Leone stripped away his ability to act traditionally, to speak, to emote, to plane. But Leone had been right. The less Clint did, the more powerful he became. After the screening, there was a standing ovation. 5 minutes, 10. The audience wouldn't stop. And Clint stood there, uncomfortable as always with praise, wondering what they were applauding. The film? Leone's vision? Or The Man with No Name, that character he'd tried so hard to bury? A young filmmaker approached him after. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, "I just want to say thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that heroes don't have to be perfect, that sometimes the right thing to do is survive, that morality isn't always clear, that film can be more than entertainment. It can be art." Clint looked at her, then at the crowd still applauding. And for the first time in 40 years, he understood. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly wasn't the film he wanted to make, but it was the film the world needed. In 1966, during Vietnam, during civil rights struggles, during a time when heroes were being revealed as frauds and the American dream was collapsing, people needed a different kind of Western, one that didn't lie, one that showed men as they were, not as they wanted to be. Leone understood that. Clint didn't. Not then. But he understood it now. And the hatred he'd carried for decades, that resentment that this film defined him, it started to soften, not disappear. Clint was too stubborn for that. But soften. In 2009, a young director named Christopher Nolan visited Clint on the set of Invictus. They talked about craft, about directing, about the difficulty of making films that mattered. And Nolan said something that stuck with Clint. "You know what I love about the good, the bad, and the ugly? It's not afraid to be ugly. Every other Western pretends that violence is clean, that good guys win and bad guys lose. But your film, it shows that everyone loses. The gold gets buried, thousands die, and Blondie walks away with blood on his hands and nothing else." Clint corrected him. "It's not my film. It's Sergio's film." Nolan shook his head. "No, it's both of yours. He had the vision, but you made it real. Without your face, without your presence, it's just a violent art film. You gave it humanity. Even when Blondie does terrible things, we still want him to survive. That's you. That's your performance. Whether you like it or not. Whether you like it or not." That phrase haunted Clint, because that was the truth. He didn't like the film, probably never would, but it existed, and it mattered, and millions of people loved it, found meaning in it, found themselves in the man with no name, that silent figure who survived when survival seemed impossible. The legacy of the good, the bad, and the ugly isn't about Clint Eastwood's feelings. It's about what the film did to cinema. It changed Westerns forever. After Leone, you couldn't make simple morality tales anymore. Audiences expected complexity, expected heroes to be flawed, expected violence to have consequences. Every revisionist Western that followed, from Unforgiven to No Country for Old Men to True Grit, owes something to Leone's vision. And Clint, who spent 50 years trying to escape the man with no name, accidentally proved Leone right. His later films, the ones he directed himself, are all about the same themes. Men confronting their past, violence as trauma, the impossibility of redemption. He thought he was rejecting Leone's vision, but he was actually fulfilling it. He was making the films Leone would have made if Leone had lived long enough. Sergio Leone died in 1989. Heart attack, 60 years old. Clint didn't attend the funeral. People criticized him for that, said he was ungrateful. But Clint had his reasons, private reasons. He'd said goodbye to Leone years earlier, not in person, but in his heart. He'd forgiven him for making Clint uncomfortable, for pushing him into a role he didn't want, for creating a character that would define him forever. In 2015, at 85 years old, Clint gave an interview to Empire magazine. The journalist asked the inevitable question, "If you could go back, would you still do the good, the bad, and the ugly?" Clint thought for a long moment. Then he smiled, just slightly, the kind of smile the man with no name would give. "Yes," he said, "but I'd complain about it just as much." That's who Clint Eastwood is, not the character, not the icon. A man who did something he hated, that became something beautiful, and spent his entire life trying to understand why. A man who learned that sometimes the things we resist most are the things that define us, that sometimes the best art comes from discomfort, that sometimes hating what you make doesn't mean it's not great. In that editing room in Rome in 1966, Clint watched himself on screen and saw a stranger, a character he didn't recognize, a hero who wasn't heroic, a film he didn't believe in, and he was right to hate it, because that hatred, that friction between actor and role, that's what made the performance electric. You can see it in every frame. Clint fighting against Leone's vision even as he embodies it perfectly. 50 years later, people still watch the good, the bad, and the ugly. Still quote it. Still feel something when Morricone's music swells and Blondie walks into that cemetery for the final duel. They don't see an actor who hated his role. They see a legend, a man who survived when survival seemed impossible, a character who told the truth about the West, about war, about humanity. And Clint, who tried so hard to be anything but the man with no name, accidentally became exactly what Leone always knew he was: timeless, iconic, unforgettable, even when he wanted desperately to be forgotten. That's the paradox. The film Clint Eastwood hated became the film that made everything else possible. Without it, there's no Dirty Harry, no Unforgiven, no directing career, no legacy, just a television actor who almost made it. Leone saw something in Clint that Clint didn't see in himself, and that vision, that refusal to let Clint be comfortable, created cinema history.